Welcome. We're talking about climate change today, especially planetary health, which you may not have heard this topic before, but this is a new phrase and terminology that's getting used a lot more to understand all of the things that are happening with climate change and beyond, because it turns out that there's so many systems that are being impacted, both within the body and then outside the body, that we're going to be expecting a lot of impacts to come. So we're going to go through a couple of those, but all of these are just huge topics in themselves. So keep an eye out for these amazing fields. So we've made a lot of great strides. So we're living longer than ever before. We have fewer of our population living in poverty, and we have less child mortality. So those are all wonderful things. However, we have a lot of damaging effects to our planet right now, and we're seeing a lot of problems. So for example, carbon dioxide emissions, which is a huge driver for climate change, those are increasing substantially. We're also seeing the oceans becoming more acidic. We're using more energy. We're losing our forests, we're using more water, and we're also increasing our fertilizer use, which you're like, wow, why did that matter? But it turns out then we'll have some increases in harmful algal blooms, which will cause additional problems down the road. So as we're starting to think about these issues and these man-made impacts on climate change, I want you to think about some additional areas where we might expect to see impact. So to further convince you, in addition, we're seeing increases in our world population. We're using more grain and food production, and we're using more water. So some of the things that we're expecting to see is an increase in deaths related to climate change, and we're going to go through exactly how that might even be possible, but it's going to be substantial. We're also expecting to see a lot of biodiversity, so a loss of all sorts of species and threatening of others. There are going to be millions who are going to be undernourished and malnourished. We're expecting to see increases in water usage where there are going to be severe water stress for a substantial portion of the world. And then also, as we're starting to get warmer and we might have loss of biodiversity, we're expecting to see issues related to the soil. So the soil might not be as healthy as it was previously. So as we're starting to think about these things, the field of planetary health really kind of talks about the intersectionality between all of these amazing fields. And there are all sorts of ways that we can work towards planetary health. And that may involve food waste, it may involve using water efficiently, reducing our carbon footprint, all sorts of really amazing things. The other part, which I find incredibly exciting, is that planetary health is not one discipline. It actually is so many different fields related to health sciences and the natural and physical sciences, and then the overlay between these fields. So whether you're a genetics researcher or you're interested in urban planning, or maybe you're a mental health professional, you are going to be impacted in some way related to climate change. So, and there are all sorts of different ways where you can start putting these connections together. So we're going to be talking about quite a few of those. So for example, like as we're talking about like air and air pollution, for example, there's a new study that just came out looking at neurological impacts down the road. So there's a lot of effects that we're going to be expecting. And one of the goals of this class is helping you to make predictions about what you can expect based on what you know in these various areas. The thing that is important, the takeaway, is that carbon dioxide is a major contributor. It is one of many greenhouse gases, and it's contributing to the warming of the earth. So you are often going to hear about carbon dioxide emissions increasing, and then the way that where carbon goes is into either the ocean or into the plants. But our problem is that we are producing way more of these greenhouse gases than the sink rate. Therefore, we're going to increase having more and more carbon dioxide, which can contribute to global warming, ocean acidification, climate change, and planetary health. Often you'll hear about these stabilization triangles, which is just a term of like, how are we going to reduce carbon dioxide to get down to a manageable amount where we're not seeing such damaging impacts. And this is taken from a game, which is really fun. And there are different ways that you can reduce carbon emissions. And there are so many amazing strategies, and we're going to talk about a few of those as well. But know that there are so many ways that you could do it. There are pros and cons related to all of them, but finding strategies to reduce our carbon footprint so we're not having these massive increases in carbon emissions is really, really important. So it's not just rising temperatures, but it's actually going to be a ton of different weather patterns. So as we warm, we're going to melt some of the ice caps. So we're going to see sea level rise. The carbon dioxide will go into the water, so we'll see some ocean acidification. We're expecting to see more extremes between drought and floods and wildfires and heat waves, and we're probably going to be seeing some increased air pollution as well. So as things get warmer and a little bit more variable, you imagine that the where various mosquitoes are living or where certain plants are living, that's going to change. So they may not be able to live in their current environment. It might get too warm, it might get too dry. So you're going to see a change in the habitats. So you might see a difference in some of the vector-borne diseases that we're going to be talking about. You may see differences in how people are growing food and where water is available. And also, as there are additional storms or as there are more wildfires, you're going to see a ton of housing dislocation, issues related to mental health from all of these stressors of being moved and coming back. And we're going to see a lot of mortality from these weather extremes. So there are a ton of ethical considerations related to all of these things to keep in mind. And so just as a heads up, people are like, well, how does carbon dioxide contribute to ocean acidification? So this is just a quick diagram to show you. So the ocean will take in the carbon dioxide, it mixes with the water, and it produces carbonic acid. And what that carbonic acid does is that it mixes with the carbonate that's often in the shells of our marine friends, and then it will weaken those shells, so it will produce calcium carbonate. So there is two different ways that you can look at the diagram for the same issue, but the short version is that it's going to wreak havoc on a lot of our marine mollusk friends, corals, etc. And then this is a large diagram, which I recognize, but as we're starting to think about like the pressures and the states and the exposures and experiences what we can expect, this is a nice diagram for kind of putting everything in perspective. So you don't necessarily need to know all of it, but the impacts of climate change and for planetary health are immense. Please start to get a framework for how some of the things that we might expect. We need you. And then finally, go down the rabbit hole in whatever area you are interested in. So if you are interested in some of the specific health impacts, one of my favorites is this climate and health assessment. They have specific sections related to all sorts of amazing things. So you can go down the rabbit hole in any sort of these different areas. And also, if you're interested in this like stabilization wedges or how are we going to reduce greenhouse gases? So Project Drawdown has some great examples of what that means and what potential solutions may be. So both are amazing resources to learn more. Happy public health.